it a crossing? A place where breath meets soil, where chaos kisses stillness, where something small dares to reach for the impossible. A seed torn loose from the limbs of giants spiraled through warm air, carried by the invisible hands of wind. It drifted down through golden canopies, through fractured sunlight, through the whispers of older trees. It landed in open light. A clearing. Ferns spread wide like welcome mats, moss thick beneath. Raindrops glisten on leaves, too young to remember drought. The earth still warm from the dying heat of afternoon. And the seed cracked open, not with sound but with stillness breaking. Two pale leaves, thin as breath, trembling like nerves, unfurled in the shadow of stones, reaching upward like hands opening in prayer. The rains came often in those early days, gentle silver veils, falling in rhythm, not violence. Each drop a lullaby, a reminder that the sky knew where the ground was and chose to return. Roots spread downward, threading into darkness, finding veins of water no sun had ever touched. The first visitor was a bird, small, blue-throated, impossibly fast. It perched on the thinnest branch, twitched once, then sang. A sound too large for such a small chest, as if joy had nowhere else to go. More came. Feathers in every color, nestlings learning to fly from its arms, songs that rose each dawn like offerings, wings that knew which limbs would hold and which would break. The clearing grew crowded in time, other saplings took root. Some stretched wild, some curled close, some grew tall and toppled young, others stood long and softened into mulch. A forest rising and receding like breath across centuries. Time passed without clocks, marked in bark, corded in rings, not counted, carried. Storms came like teachers, winds bent the trunk sideways until roots screamed. Thunder moved through the ground like old bones groaning. Lightning split the sky, claws flashing so close the bark steamed for hours. Then droughts, long airless summers. Soil cracking open in thirst, leaves crisping, curling inward like frightened hands. Still, roots clawed deeper, chasing cold rivers no sun could steal. And fires, slow at first, crawling through dry grass, low heat, smoke like old breath, flames winding up trunks like ancient serpents. In every drop of rain, nests gone silent, limbs fallen black, yet moisture held below the ruin, and still it grew. Animals brushed against its bark without ceremony, mice nesting in hollows, deer scraping velvet from antlers, owls returning each winter, heavy and ghost silent. Every scrape, every claw, every whisper recorded, stored, carved into its fibers. Generations passed above the roots, winters thinning the canopy, summers flooding with insects, each year another song, another grief, another beauty. Then the sky changed, not a season, not a storm, something older than both. It began as a shimmer at the horizon, a pulse that stilled the birds was no time. And yet, one tree did not fall. Scorched, blistered crown, split but still upright. Roots clenched into broken soil, not out of strength, not out of faith, but refusal. Leaves turned orange and clung, too late for autumn, too early for death, curled not from cold but from grief. Ash gathered like prayers unsent. The wind returned but had no songs to carry, only silence, silence and the last witness. Time moved differently after, the sun still rose but no forest answered. Seasons still shifted but nothing followed. The earth stopped waiting for footsteps. Then came the watchers from above, boots stirring dust that once was green, eyes wide, hands careful, voices hushed like pilgrims before a ruin too sacred to touch. They circled the standing tree, scanned it, measured its rings, traced bark as if it might hum with answers. But no answers came. Only presence. Only memory. Not dead, not alive, enduring. They called it miracle, they called it sacred, they called it over. The tree did not argue, had no mouth to speak. The seasons moved, but the forest no longer answered. Wind crossed the plain, but carried no song. Rain fell, but fed only silence. The world held itself in mourning. Then, return. The watchers came again, not as explorers, but as exiles. Engines spent, ships abandoned. They stepped onto a world they had once called ruin. There was nowhere else to go. At the center of the hollow, the tree remained. Its bark split, its crown shattered, its roots sunk deep into broken earth. Blistered, yet upright. Silent, yet enduring. The exiles gathered at its base. They drank from the dark water hidden in its roots. They found insects in its hollows, worms in its shadow. They ate, they lived. Shelters rose around the trunk, ash pressed into walls, fern woven into roofs. Nights were survived by leaning against its heat. Hands bound splintered branches, poured water at the base, covered roots against storms. The tree was tended, not worshipped. It became necessity. And in its shadow, life began again. Small shoots pierced the ash, ferns uncurled, tentative but persistent. Moss spread in damp corners, children born beneath the trunk guarded those first fragile greens as inheritance. Years folded into decades, the first who landed became bones beneath the soil. Their children carried water in stone bowls, their children after them planted seeds, gathered and bartered. Failure was constant, survival was difficult, but persistence became practice. And slowly, color returned, green crept across the gray, saplings rose, insects multiplied, a bird's call broke silence at dawn, hesitant, then answered, then echoed until the air trembled with wings once more. The tree remained at the center. Ring upon ring, its body recorded the turning of generations. The scars of fire did not fade, but they became part of the record. Reminders pressed into living wood. Each spring that passed beneath its branches widened the circle of forest. Each autumn marked survival, not ending. Oceans filled again. Rivers carved new paths through softened stone. Skies cleared. The planet remembered itself. The descendants no longer spoke of the comet. They no longer counted themselves as exiles. They told instead of the standing tree, the last witness, a monument not of stone but of endurance, a reminder that patience does not only grieve, it can restore. And in that story, the tree was no longer alone. The world it held in memory had begun to return. after the last engine marks faded from the scorched earth, a city grew again. Not of stone, but of green. Around the burned trunk new shoots rose, slender at first, then braided into groves. In the hollows of those groves, the children of exiles built shelters, then halls, then gardens. The tree that had stood alone became a center. Not a monument, but a root. Pollen drifted on air, the color of old copper. Insects reappeared, first as flickers, then as clouds. Moss crept back across glass basins. Rivers stitched themselves out of melt and rain. Seasons began to have meaning again. Knowledge that had once broken the planet now served it. Resonance was retuned from blade to bomb. Towers that had sung destruction were rebuilt as instruments of shelter. Slow harmonic fields to heal soil, to call rain, to coax seeds from dormancy. The great libraries of the first ships were emptied into soil schools where children learned to listen before they built. Centuries passed, generations grew under a canopy that spread from the original trunk like a starburst of living corridors. Bugs were not swatted but harvested carefully. Some became food, some pollinators. Surviving strands of extinct plants were coaxed from the tree's bark and replanted until meadows formed again. The scars of the comet never vanished. Glass planes still reflected dawn like broken mirrors, but the broken mirrors were tended. Pilgrims walked across them barefoot to remember the cost of forgetting. In time, no one called it the tree at all. It was the axis, the first, the keeper. Stories said its roots reached through the planet to touch the bones of oceans. Songs said its leaves held the names of those had burned at night. Bioluminescent insects moved through its branches like constellations, and elders read them as omens the way earlier ages had read stars. The exiles who had once landed as wanderers became something else. A culture grown not from conquest but from repair. A people who built slowly, spoke carefully, and taught their young that patience was not waiting but tending. The tree remained, bark still scarred, crown still split, but taller than any tower they dared build. Rings within rings, each one a century of silence and effort. And when strangers came again from the sky, because strangers always come, they did not find ruins. They found a world green as any legend, and at its center a living axis surrounded by a people who had learned to make power answer to care. They were told a single phrase upon landing, passed from elder to child across thousands of years. A memory of the first mistake. All songs cut, but only some heal. Some said it was written in the ship's logs. Some said tree endured for longer than memory. Roots through stone, crown above storms. Centuries bent around it, civilizations rose and softened at its feet. Children were born beneath its branches and died as elders in its shade. Its bark held carvings so old their languages had no speakers left. But nothing holds forever. The first sign was silence. Bird song thinned in the upper canopy. Leaves failed to return after winter. Branches bare even in the full heat of summer. Sap slowed, thickened, retreated, not sudden, never sudden, but steady, a dimming that even the most faithful could not mistake. Healers came with resonance, tuned to gentleness. They poured harmonic fields into roots, sang lullabies and frequencies designed to soothe. Children brought buckets of soil from far valleys as if richer earth might persuade it to stay. Entire harvests were given up so nutrients could be laid at its base. Prayers became medicine, and medicine became ritual, and ritual became desperation. But the last ring was already closing. Storms came and the great trunk did not bend, it cracked. Lightning struck and instead of steaming bark there was fire. Ash fell not as omen but as fact. The crown, once a constellation of green, collapsed inward like a lung exhaling for the last time. When it finally fell, the sound carried across continents. Every village felt it through their bones, a resonance deeper to the earthquakes, sharper than thunder. Those who witnessed it swore the ground itself cried out. They did not burn the remains. They did not carve it into monuments. They laid each splinter where it fell, ring against ring, branch against branch, until the ruins of the trunk became a cathedral of silence. And in that silence, something else stirred. Seeds, long hidden in fissures of bark, spilled out. Some had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for light that never reached the forest floor. Now, in the open, they rooted, dozens, hundreds. The keeper died, but its memory fractured into multitudes. No single axis remained. Instead, a grove, each sapling carrying a different inheritance of its rings. Some tall, some gnarled, some fragile. Not one of them the keeper. All of them descended. The people did not call it death. They called it turning. The first had ended, but its end was not absence, it was abundance. And when they told this story as they always had, around fires and songs in the quiet where children listened hardest, they added one line to the old warning. Even the strongest root must break. But breaking is not the end. Breaking is how forests begin.